Happy Sunday. You are listening to Rainbow Radio. In my humble opinion, with Niceguy Eddie is coming up next. So yesterday I watched as the Confederate battle flag was removed from the state grounds at the South Carolina state capitol. It was very interesting. It was a historic moment, and I think that it's not common that I'm going to give a Republican governor or a Republican-led state legislature a lot of credit, but I have to say that Nikki Haley and the South Carolina legislature, and also the black community and the white community in that town, following a tremendous tragedy, really showed people, I think, where the better nature of this country is, where the better nature of people are, and I think it was a good day all around. I was particularly interested in the method in which, though, that they did remove it. They had a very brief ceremony, nothing, there was no music or big fanfare or anything, but a very solemn ceremony to remove the flag, treating it with what was called the proper respect. Now, this is, of course, the proper respect from the point of view of Southerners who view it as part of their heritage. I'm a Northerner, so I have a slightly different take on the flag, and I suppose I might as well go ahead and throw it out there. It is about time that it comes down. I was watching this with I'm just going to say a conservative family member of mine, and who said some really interesting / ignorant things, I think. I mean, overall, he also was applauding that it was being taken down and the method by which it is coming down, both the reactions from the community and the legislature and everything else. This is a good response. I don't know if it doesn't really change anything. And I suppose that there was some appropriation of the tragedy, some opportunism, but ultimately this is a good thing. But he had made a couple of comments how maybe the blacks were better being brought over as slaves because they live better now in the United States than they do in Africa or something like that, which I just had to facepalm. I'm just like, look at this guy like, what? And then to go on, he said, well, and the flag is, it is a good heritage. I mean, these Confederate soldiers, they were fighting for what they believed in. I said, wait a second, stop. I had to call him out there. I wasn't going to call him out with the other thing only because, you know what, you can't argue with people that think it was better that people were brought over as slaves. You're never going to win that argument. It's not worth. But to say that the Confederate soldiers were fighting for what they believed, I had to call them out. I said, come on. These Confederate soldiers were poor saps who were living in log cabins and hunting and scratching a subsistence living, who were basically conscripted to go and fight for rich landowners and slave owners. Come on, these guys were not fighting for what they believed in. And by the way, I'm also a little bit tired of hearing about the great Southern heritage, but that it has nothing to do with slavery. And I mean, the extension of that, of course, is that they'll tell you, these same people will tell you the Civil War was not about slavery, it was about states' rights, which is kind of idiotic. In fact, the states' rights in question was slavery. I actually had one guy try to tell me that the Confederacy was going to end slavery anyway. Well, if that was the case, then why were they fighting it tooth and nail in the legislature? Why was it this hot topic issue of the first half of the 19th century? So, I mean, it's absurd. It was not about states' rights any more than Roe v. Wade was about privacy, okay? If you're going to take slavery out of the Civil War, then I suppose Roe v. Wade had nothing to do with abortion either. So, and the other thing, they talk about heritage, and I was talking about this with some folks, and I was saying, well, obviously they didn't raise this flag like the day after General Lee, surrendered at Appomattox and signed the terms of their surrender. So when did this go back up? I mean, because it wasn't flying the week after the Civil War ended, obviously. So when did it go back up? And it really went up, and this is the important thing, is it went up in the era of desegregation and civil rights, and then in the late 1950s and 1960s, this is when this started to spring up around various places in the South, basically in opposition to civil rights and the desegregation. So again, this is not about the Civil War, because this doesn't go back to the Civil War, not anymore. Not anymore. They have not been flying it since the days of the Civil War. Again, that's right-wing nonsense. That's the same thing. They'll make you think that Under God was in the Pledge of Allegiance from the start. No, that was added in the 1950s as well. So a lot of what these conservatives are saying is all about history and tradition is really stuff that they added in the childhood of the current older retiring baby boomers. Okay, so it's been conventional wisdom for 2 or 3 generations now, but that's as far back as it goes. Now, the final point on this, though, is, to me, this is not about Southern heritage. It's not about hate or even racism. Okay, you can divorce it all from that, and I think it is those things. But you can divorce it all from that, and just point out that this is the flag. This is the battle flag of a rogue state, of a nation of traitors. When you are a part of the United States and you want to leave and take all this land and all these people with you and defy the federal government and rebel against federal, there's a word for that, and that word is traitor. Now, when you win, like we were traitors to the British Crown, but when you win, no, you're a patriot. Yeah, only winners get to be patriots. Losers, traitors. Had we lost the Revolutionary War, guess what? George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, etc., would not have been the founding fathers. They would have been traitors to the crown and been hung. Okay. Now we actually treated the Civil War veterans better than that. We treated them as America. We welcomed them back in. And yes, there was a Reconstruction. There's a lot of history there. But ultimately, this is a symbol less of racism and hate to me than simple treason. And on that basis alone, if we're going to be patriotic and we're going to be the United States of America, we don't need symbols of our division. And that's really, at its absolute best, that's what it is. Anyway, the flag has come down. The sky has not fallen. And speaking of the sky has not fallen, it's been a couple weeks now since the Supreme Court handed the decision down on gay marriage. Haven't heard anybody, any rainbow tornadoes or anything like that destroying any churches or whatever. The wrath of God apparently is being held off for another day. But I also wanted to point something else out because a few weeks ago I had a street interview with some folks in the Lyndon LaRouche camp, and I think I'm gonna check in with them again because just this last week, Greece has they essentially held a vote, and the vote 60-40 was in favor of leaving the Eurozone, and I think ultimately demanding concessions from the IMF regarding their debt, and certainly rejecting this is a rejection of the austerity measures that are being imposed upon them. Now, it was a rough couple of days, but for example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average went up 211 points today alone and is basically where it was the day that all of this came about with Greece. Everybody was saying, oh my God, what's the stock market going to do? Well, it didn't really do shit. And ultimately, this was what I was predicting. You may recall the LaRouche folks were predicting that when Greece ultimately defaulted, which they were saying was going to happen kind of now-ish, that this was going to bring down the entire transatlantic financial system. And you might remember me saying two things. One, there is no such thing as the transatlantic financial system. That's a fancy name that anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists use to describe something that largely only exists in their heads. And secondly, that Greece was simply too small a problem to bring down any large economic systems. If the so-called transatlantic financial system was crashing all around us, the Dow Jones Industrial Average would not have gone up 200 points today. So, ultimately, again, there are going to be problems for Greece moving forward. But again, that same conservative that I was talking about earlier just thought they were crazy. He said, they're crazy. They should stay in the euro. They should keep the euro as their currency. And they should go under austerity. And I'm going, whoa, wow. You know what? They probably would have a benefit staying under the euro. I will give you that. Well, maybe. I don't know. Because doing so, especially under these austerity measures, and especially because they don't really have the ability to inflate the currency or increase, etc., they can't really, they're kind of hamstrung. And austerity, as I have said many times, is exactly what no economy needs. There is nothing in austerity that gets an economy going. And ultimately, they're going to need two things. They're going to need to get their economy going, which they can't do under austerity, and they can't do really on their own under the euro, especially, again, with those measures imposed. And they need an effective method of tax collection. That was their problem initially, and especially if they default here. Obviously, their ability to borrow is going to be particularly weak. So if they are going to inflate the currency, if they are going to go on a spending spree, they're going to have to do it via taxation. And again, that's not going to happen without some economic gain, which means they're going to be having to be spending. In other words, Greece has to get themselves out of this problem. And their ability to do that is being hamstrung right now by the IMF and the European Union. Frankly, I don't know if I want to make any predictions about Greece being any better off. They got into this mess. They really haven't fixed the structural problems within their country. A lot of people say it's all about they spend more than they take in, but that's the problem. They don't take in hardly anything because they really had a very lax and shitty and ineffective method of collecting taxes before. Basically, the Greeks, it was endemic. They just don't pay their taxes. That has to stop. They have to collect taxes, but they have to get rid of this austerity. And I think the Greeks are right to do that. I think that will make life better, but whether or not it has any long-term improvements, hey, Greece's problems are going to have to be solved by the Greeks. Anyway, moving on. My guest today is Deedee Freedberg. I was put in touch with her through a mutual acquaintance. Deedee, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Well, glad to be here.
Before we really get into the to the nitty gritty and the issues and all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Oh my goodness, what can I say? I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for more years than I care to remember at the Boston Phoenix.
Ah.
Now operating an online journal called Herosphere with my partner Heather Cornell, and I'm a journalist with a great deal of concentration in politics, having done that for over 40 years too.
Excellent. Okay, well, this is
all of it in Massachusetts. I will admit, I'm very provincial Boston person.
and just for everyone else, we were talking before the show because I'm originally from Boston, although I have not lived in Massachusetts since 1979, 1980. So it's been a while. But I am originally from the Boston area as well.
I'm Massachusetts, who have lived here all my life, with the exception of a few years in New York City. Fourth generation Massachusetts, for whatever it's worth. Very local.
All right. Well, now, okay.
Doesn't mean I'm provincial or a hick, though. I do see the bigger picture.
Well, that's what we want to get to. That's what we want to get to here. And one of the reasons I want to talk to you now. You had made a prediction on one of your publications. It might have ultimately been just the Facebook page, but that you believe the most likely next president is going to be Jeb Bush. So you believe Jeb Bush is going to win the Republican nomination and win the general election. That's the most likely scenario. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it right. It's all changed on Friday when the House Democrats stiffed President Obama's trade policy. I think that is an extremely momentous event, and it changes everything, yes.
Now, you're talking about the TPP, of course.
I am indeed.
Okay. So now, all right. Now, do I detect any regret of that or celebration of that from you? What are your feelings about the TPP, and what are your feelings about what you feel of the...
I absolutely regret it. I think it was a tremendous mistake. Tend to think that I would much prefer to have a Democratic president, because a Democratic president is not backward on the social issues.
Okay.
I don't really think America wants to go back that way, so I'd like to have a Democratic president.
Yeah.
But the biggest conceivable issue is the economy and our position in the world economy.
Yeah.
And if the House Democrats are going to stick it to a Democratic president, then, all bets are off on the biggest issue that there is. And
yeah.
I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. I'm very, very upset about it. Yes.
So you're upset at the Democratic rank and file, essentially, for opposing TPP and pushing their representatives in Congress to oppose TPP.
I'm upset that that one Democratic interest group, the most backward interest group.
And what is that?
At the AFL-CIO, who's see their task as protecting jobs that are going away anyway if they're not already gone.
Well, okay, but wait a second.
Advancing new jobs, not trying to protect jobs that are going out or are already gone.
Okay, but a lot of these jobs are already gone, largely because of free trade agreements, such as the TPP, going back to NAFTA and others.
No, I don't agree with that. A lot of them many of those jobs went by way of NAFTA, but not because of NAFTA. They went that way because the world already had begun to change to a new economic model. We are now well into that phase.
Well, wait,
into the new world of work.
Yeah, okay, but it's an economic model of finding cheap labor and having no tariffs for goods to cross borders.
Cheap labor to do stuff that really has no value added anymore. 60 years ago, assembly and manufacture were cutting edge, and you had to have it done where people were best set up to do it and where you had the factories most efficient in doing it. Today, most of the time, that stuff is really cookie-cutter stuff. Value-added jobs are in the technology field, and for that, in the networking field, the fields of human relations, professional work. the high-level service industries, and all the work that needs to be done reconciling a variety of international economies. That's where value-added work
wait a
is.
second. Now,
And unions should be protecting value-added work.
Well, hold on. Now, I don't disagree in terms of where the new jobs are, but I got to challenge you on something there because you talking about, okay, you say that the plant needs to be where used to be need to be where people were highly technical, but I look at stuff we get back from China. We've had a lot of issues with cheap goods coming from China, which is where the bulk of our stuff comes from now, and yet we've had all kinds of problems with defective items, with toxic items, all kinds, counterfeit goods, all kinds of issues with that, and yet they're basically, they're not beating us because they're better at putting stuff together. They're not beating us because of technology. Not entirely. They have good technology, but that's not why they're beating. They're beating us because their government controls their currency and controls their labor rate. That's not competing. That's not a competitive advantage to have 1 billion starving people who are willing to work for $1 a day.
By the way, the TPP,
yeah,
the Trans-Pacific Pact, is not with China. It's with 14 nations, all of whom have as their common interest competing with China in currency manipulation, in foreign exchange, in tariffs, and for that matter, in intellectual property.
But net and net.
The nations in the TPP include Australia, Vietnam, South Korea, Malaysia, and most of whom are even more threatened by China than we are.
But net and net, you're talking about, you mentioned, you talk about highly technical jobs. You say the union should be protecting the jobs of the future. But the fact is, we're not going to have an entire nation full of top-level technical designers. Okay, you're going to have you're going to have a broad range of people. And I mean, yes, you're right. We need more engineers. I'm an engineer myself by profession, and I do believe we need more engineers. I think we need to pay them better too. But I'm a little biased in that regard. But to say that we should be outsourcing manufacturing jobs, I just wonder how we're going to have an economy.
I didn't. Wait a minute.
Well, okay, hold on.
Putting words in my mouth. I didn't say we should be outsourcing.
But that's the net result of these agreements.
I said those jobs have gone. By a matter of fact, should be pushing it? No. In fact, some of those jobs are even coming back here.
Yeah.
Coming back here because the transportation costs have become a lot more than they were, although today that's down a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
But, basically, no. I don't think the American economy of the future should be depending on assembly and manufacturing jobs, with a couple of exceptions.
Okay,
Boeing
but how do we
and automobiles?
Then what are we? Okay, you mentioned automobiles. That's my neck of the woods right now, and I've been to plants here, and yeah, some of it's highly skilled and some of it's unskilled. It's a mix. But Ford Motor Company, for example, has a lot of plants right here in Michigan. They're probably one of the best U.S. manufacturers. Well, what we call U.S. manufacturers, actually. Toyota and Honda probably build more cars in the U.S. than half the U.S. automakers do. But I'm just looking at this going, you say that we shouldn't be outsourcing jobs, but these free trade agreements are going to have that net effect.
I didn't say that we shouldn't be. I said that the outsourcing of jobs I don't consider to be a policy. It is an event. Policy should be in the area of promoting the jobs of the future and protecting their ability to transact.
Why is that? But why is that mutually exclusive
in the overseas and international economy?
Why is that mutually exclusive?
Again, not mutually exclusive. Priorities are priorities. That doesn't mean that the second priority is nothing. But priorities need to be. Well, politics is an art of prioritization.
Sure.
And I think we should prioritize that which is most valuable. In addition, of course, the new economy has an enormous number of different kinds of service jobs. And if unions want to do something useful, they can promote the $15 an hour minimum wage for low-level service workers. And many of them are doing that, by the way.
They are
and
doing
that.
That
is where their energy should be.
Okay.
Not on hamstringing our country's ability to create trade agreements with nations that are fighting battles overseas. And most of the TPP, by the way, most of it is involved in currency reconciliation of a variety of issues, patent issues, kinds of corporate governance issues, that sort of thing.
Okay, then two questions about it because actually it was not necessarily the TPP that was killed so much as the fast tracking of the TPP, which perhaps, yes, you're right, undermines it for Obama because of course the clock is ticking. But first of all, why should these things be fast tracked? First of all, and certainly why should they be fast tracked when the vast majority of Americans don't understand it, don't know what's in it, largely because this has been negotiated mostly secretly. I mean, it takes WikiLeaks for us to get any information here. I
Well,
mean,
first of all, treaties are always
but
negotiated secretly. They're not negotiated in public. This isn't a town hall or a referendum. The treaty is presented after negotiation
but
to the Senate for approval or not.
you're
That
asking
is the
people,
process.
that are meant to support labor nominally, whether you agree with it or not, to accept this and to get and to have the politicians that represent them to accept this without them understanding how it's affected them, and especially when you look at past treaties
They
that
will
have
get
the
to
net effects.
understand when the treaty is presented for debate in the Senate.
But
that
not
is
if it's
the
fast
process
tracked.
we operate under.
But not
we
if it's fast
don't
tracked.
have government by referendum.
Not if it's fast tracked. And that's
fast track. All that fast track means is that the president only needs to present the treaty to the Senate once, not 6 times or 5 times. That is all it is.
Okay. Well, what's wrong with that? Why can't we have the kind of debate on this over something that isn't significant as you say? Why should this be something here? See it once and vote on it. Why can we not have this go through a standard process?
Had we been moving forward, we would have had the debate when the treaty was presented to the Senate. That is how we operate all kinds of treaties. The labor union, the AFL-CIO, the president asked for fast track so he wouldn't have to come to the Senate 5 or 6 times, so he could come once with the completed treaty and then, ask for a vote and a debate and all that sort of thing.
And how does he? But his vote's coming from the opposition
party. He wants the authority, as any president should, to negotiate treaties basically without having the Senate be his co-negotiators. There's nothing in the Constitution that provides for the Senate to be co-negotiators of things. They are there to advise and consent.
Yes, but they have the legal authority to ratify that treaty or not.
Yes, of course, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That is exactly the authority they have.
But fast track is something that has been created in order to short circuit that process. No.
No, it is not. Absolutely not.
Come on.
The fast track request by the president is strictly to say we want the negotiation to proceed without interference until it is completed, and then it can be presented to the Senate. As I said again, 1 time, not 5 or 6 times. And that makes a lot of sense to me because the more parties that are involved in negotiation, the more difficult they are.
Well, of course.
We have seen in the Senate recently that it's tried to get involved in the negotiation of the Iran nuclear, the seven-party Iran nuclear treaty.
Yeah.
I think, and most of the Senate involvement has made it more difficult to reach a treaty.
Absolutely.
Not less.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, fair enough. But let's face it, the Senate involvement of going around somebody's back and telling the people you're negotiating with, oh yeah, by the way, we're gonna stab this guy in the back, and he's gonna be out of office in 6 months, is not the same as saying we want this presented to us and we want the opportunity to go through the way this typically goes through, not with this one-time negotiation, which is a new thing.
That's how most treaties are done. The Senate gets one bite at the apple, not 6.
Well, then you don't have to request fast track if that's supposed to be the way that it's normally done. Then it would be the way it's normally done. The fact that you have to request that and the Senate has to grant that means that that is not the way it's normally done. That the Senate has that authority to choose to do that or not.
He's requesting fast track so that there won't be constant questioning of the U.S. Trade Representative who is negotiating the treaty, and I see nothing wrong with that at all. I think that's fine.
Well, ultimately, I think whether or not how you feel about that's going to depend entirely about how you feel upon the treaty itself. And you know what? I see a lot of opposition lately to the idea of free trade agreements, mainly because these are based on we have a net trade gap and a trade deficit, if you will, generally speaking, with almost every country, we're largely an import nation, largely because of labor costs, which have nothing to do with the American worker and everything to do with the fact that you've got a lot of countries out there with a lot of cheap labor. Not because of any competitive advantage, because largely the cost of living and the standard of living is a lot lower. I don't know.
We have a trade gap for a enormous variety of reasons. By the way, our trade gap is much smaller now than it's been in 20 years, largely thanks to our no longer needing to import oil, because we are now producing more oil than we use. Yeah. In fact, we would be a net exporter of oil if we could simply get law off the books that forbids the U.S. from exporting its oil.
Okay, well, that's a separate issue, and that's something that I think could be worth looking into outside of this. I don't know. I mean, again, I think if you're looking at the net effect of NAFTA, and I don't think many people on the who are not company owners, who are not net exporters, are looking at NAFTA thinking this is that great a deal. I look at what it costs to make. So you mentioned the technology, and you know what? I can't cite this right here. I'm going by memory here, but and I think the point will stand even if the math isn't quite right. You look at these phones that they sell for $300 or $400, and they're assembled for like $20. Okay, and you're telling me that it would not be good for our economy to manufacture that phone here, giving somebody a good job here to do it. Okay.
No, I do not think it was.
Oh, come on! The phone would cost the same amount
for our economy to be manufacturing low-value products. And in fact,
how is that a low-value product?
NAFTA, even though all that NAFTA did was to speed up a process that was already happening. It created a great many technology jobs because it forced investors and business startups to invest in new kinds of businesses that could bring a profit rather than go out the window.
I'm not buying that. The business opportunities were there. The technology and whatnot's going to be developed, whether or not we're making refrigerators in the United States or in Mexico. I'm not buying that. Come on. You said it sped up a process that was already happening. I agree that it was already. Well, I agree that it was happening, but you're telling me that I should back. I'm looking at jobs leaving, and I should back something that speeds that up, and I should back some. Those people didn't largely go into engineering.
The 1990s, which was the decade after NAFTA was passed through Clinton, was the era of greatest productivity growth in this country in 70 or 80 years. Mm-hmm. There were more business startups. The stock market did better during that decade
hold on
than
a second,
we've seen throughout our life.
The evidence, at the end of that,
the evidence is right there.
Whoa, hang on a second. You're going to credit. You're leaving out some huge things there. If you're going to credit that, or even say it's related to NAFTA or trade, because you're forgetting that this is when the internet comes into play. The internet does not need NAFTA to come into play. You're forgetting that at the end of all of that big stock rally, there was rather a huge correction. Now, I'm not one to necessarily talk about the tech bubble like it was a bad thing, because obviously real value came out of that.
There was a huge correction in 1998 because the Japanese economy collapsed. And with the Japanese finance, they did exactly the wrong thing.
There were a lot of very overvalued companies out there, and a lot of those companies that just had no product and no business plan, and people were going cuckoo about them because, oh my God, it's this new toy.
You're talking about the 2000 to 2003 collapse. I'm talking about the 1990s.
I'm talking about the fact that you're talking about a booming stock market, a lot of which had to do with companies that had no long-term value and were vastly overrated.
That's not true in the 1990s. You're talking about the next decade's post-internet boom, not the internet boom. And you know something? In spite of that, it was in a period of tremendous experimentation, in a period of tremendous change, and a lot of it failed.
Agreed.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Creative destruction is a pretty established process in the economic world. But anyway, I'm talking about the 1990s, and I defy you to name me an overvalued American company in the 1990s, other than Polaroid as technology was being eliminated.
All right, hang on one second. All right, hang on. I'm gonna find you one. Hold on a second. Okay, I got one for you. Pets.com started operations August 1998, closed in November 2000.
What was the name of the company?
Pets.com. Dot-com Enterprise sold pet supplies to local retail customers, began operations in August 1998, closed in November 2000. That's not part of the 2003 or 2000s bust. That was part of the 90s, and I could find a dozen examples like Pets.com.
I never heard the company. Never heard of the company.
Well, yeah, because they were a garbage company, but they had a huge advertisement. They had a huge buy in the 1999 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, an advertisement in the 2000 Super Bowl, which would have been January of 2000. But they didn't have a business plan. They didn't have a product, and they had that in common with a lot of dot-com startups who basically got huge IPOs based on investors really not knowing what the hell they were doing.
I'm not talking about the dot-com startup because I suppose you can say it began in 1999. I'm talking about the period 1992 to 1998. The period ended when the Japanese economy,
America Online, collapsed. Prodigy. I mean, again,
AOL did not peak until 2001. It did extremely well during the 1990s, and for very, very good reason. It was way ahead of the curve during the 1990s.
Absolutely.
And like crazy.
Absolutely. Okay. All right.
It was the only available dial-up other than Netscape, which it purchased.
Netscape, yeah.
I made a lot of money on AOL during the 1990s. I know it very, very well.
Well, I hope you sold it shortly after they were bought out because they didn't last much longer than that.
And an investor, and know a great deal about it.
But
give you fair warning.
Well, again though, and they were bought out by Time Warner. I'm sure you did very well, and that goes down as one of the worst mergers and worst buyout in history.
Time Warner until they had already kind of collapsed in 2001 and 2. And now, of course, AOL is not much of anything. But in the 1996 to 1999 period, it was one of the great founding companies.
Yeah,
as was Amazon.
Well, Amazon's still around. eBay's still around. There's no question there's value there, but there's no question there was a lot of nonsense there. There was very little value in Amazon at the beginning. But in any case, those companies came in the next wave. The 1990s were the era of General Electric, which was extremely, and of IBM, which were extremely valuable companies until the next decade. They had their heyday in the 90s, as did our energy firms. Well,
did many other companies. EMC was doing extremely well in the 1990s. Digital equipment until all of the major PC companies.
But why would you credit that? What reason is you're going to credit that? You're going to say NAFTA and free trade played what role in that? None of that that can all happen without having to assemble meaningless stuff somewhere else because it was not the same people doing it. You say it forces it. I don't, opportunities come up.
People are financed.
If there's an opportunity, there's going to be
from where it comes from.
Yeah.
And investment money during the 1990s went to the places where it could have the biggest bang for the buck, not for reinventing the wheel and keeping obsolete businesses going. There was some of that. But most of those obsolete businesses finally, thank goodness, died.
I'm not. You say thank God they died, but you're talking about people that went from making decent livings down to making $15 an hour if they were lucky. Instead of, I don't know. You'd kill it. The labor market has been awful. Wages have not gone up and have not kept pace with productivity.
Well, I agree with you there. That's true. I certainly favor the raising of the minimum wage enormously, which would also have the effect of raising a great many wages above it.
Yes, of course.
If you're going to raise a worker to $15 an hour,
but then
you've got to raise the worker who's making a little bit more than that.
Exactly. No, that's simple. That's simple Keynesian. That's
important thing to do.
Well, of course, and we agree with that. That's simple. That basically comes from Keynesian policy, more or less. It's demand side economics. There's no question about that. But then you're going to come around and tell me that we should be favoring trade agreements that are going to work against that are going to drive wages down, that are going to tighten the labor market.
Your characterization of the trade agreement.
Oh,
why do you think the trade agreement works against what I just said? Why do you think?
If we end up a net importer, then we're sending our money elsewhere. If we end up with jobs overseas, that's the net effect.
The TPP agreement is not about wages. It's about reconciliation
It's
of
about the
patents,
effect it would have.
reconciliation of currency, reconciliation of tariffs and protections, and reconciliation of international law disagreements, which
Okay,
when
now
you
you got
create
okay. Now there's
worldwide,
another one.
when you create contracts
No,
between companies in different countries, you've got tremendous problems of reconciliation between legal
yeah,
systems
and you
of the
got a lot
different
of problems, and you
patent
got a lot of
protection, et
problems
cetera,
with
et
how
cetera.
that. Well, there's a problem with how those disputes are settled, namely the ISDS, the International hold on Interstate Dispute Settlement System, whereby you essentially have a court where rather than going into the courts that are answerable to the people and answerable to governments, you have these things that somehow overrule that. And they're not being decided by judges. They're not being decided by elected officials. They're being
I don't
decided
know
essentially
what
by
the hell
people.
you're talking about.
I'm talking about
Courts that are not answerable to the people. I don't know what that means.
I'm talking about the provisions in the TPP, and this was one of the big sticking points. And quite frankly, I think this is one of the things that needs to go away from all treaties, and that is the ISDS, which is Investor State Dispute Settlement. It's international law, and it basically gives the right to dispute settlement proceedings against a foreign government. But again, these are not being tried in the courts of the country where the regulations are being in place. This is being done.
That's why we have treaties.
But okay, you have cases now where countries have gone and sued other international countries, like let's say a country. I believe it was Egypt and France, and I don't remember who did what, but I want to say
that is what happens when you have international trade and when you have a worldwide economy, and that is why we have treaties.
and those, but
We're
no,
not
no.
we're not going back to the 17th century and the mercantilist economy where every nation operated its own closed system. That's
Well,
not coming back.
obviously, but you're telling me that if the U.S. raises the minimum wage, because this was the precedent, this was the example I'm giving with Egypt and France, and if I remember it correctly, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, France raised their minimum wage, and the investors from Egypt sued the French government. The French government was essentially had to pay out to these for potential quote unquote lost profits due to the fact that they raised their minimum wage because the Egyptian firms had French labor and were in France. Now, to me, you don't need a treaty to say
that there is no such provision.
That's the ISDS.
The
That's what comes out of this interstate dispute settlement system. And again,
there
if you
is
give me a
no
few minutes,
such provision in the TPP. It does not have anything to do with wages paid to workers.
it is. I'm not saying that it does. I'm saying that it has the net effect that this policy will have the net effect of tightening the labor market and pressing down wages. And the
I don't agree with that.
What's that?
And I think I don't agree with that at all. I think that international treaties properly negotiated to make international trade easier have a tremendous growth effect on the economy. Well, it just may mean that it means that the economy changes. But the economy is changing anyway. The world of work is changing so rapidly right now that most policymakers haven't even figured it out, or just figured out what to do about it.
You know what? I agree with you there, but at the end of the day, you're not going to have an economy based on large amounts of people not being able to get good paying jobs. I think we agree with that, and I just don't see that. I do not see a benefit for the average worker in America. I don't see a benefit for that with this treaty. I really don't. Now, maybe that's because I haven't seen the whole thing.
Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree because I think you're wrong. You think I'm wrong. You're not going to change my mind, I assure you.
No, that much.
In fact, I think there's so many aspects to the Trans-Pacific Treaty potential that we haven't even talked about. International banks for settlements, currency situations. Oh, we could talk about currency for hours and hours and hours. Anyway,
well, come on now. I'm trying to maintain an audience.
I don't want everybody.
I know. I got an audience here. I can't talk about currency for hours and hours and hours.
The average person doesn't think about currency in terms of exchange unless they try to go to Europe and they go to their little bank and they have to pay a discount.
I think transfer
their dollars to euros. That's the only thing they know about exchange.
I think about currency exchange a lot. personally, because we have part of our company is in Japan, part of my company buys from Japan, and when currency fluctuates, yeah, price of goods changes as to whether or not we should buy from Japan, make it in Mexico, make it in the United States, buy it from China. That currency affects what we do a lot. Okay, so I do think about it, but I also think about the currency manipulation. Now I know you say it resolves it, but I will have to admit that I do not know enough about that aspect of the treaty to speak intelligently on that. But again, I'm looking at this. I'm being asked to trust something that sounds an awful lot like something in the past that I don't support and that I don't see has done really a net good or has been a necessity. But like you say,
currency manipulation is one of the world's great problems.
Yeah, well, okay,
Many
I would agree with you there.
manipulators of currency manipulated for their own selfish benefit, and it is very easy to do, and it has been done. Arbitrage has been a way of making profits since the Rothschilds basically discovered how to use it back in the 1790 to 1815 period.
All right, well,
arbitrage is one of the world's most difficult economic problems to solve.
Well,
no doubt about it.
I'll
be solved by any treaty.
Well, I'll leave you. Let's leave on a point of agreement there, I guess. So okay. Beyond the issue at hand, then beyond the TPP, why Jeb Bush?
Why Jeb Bush?
Yeah. Why Jeb Bush? Why do you think he's going to win the nomination? And how do you feel about him personally?
Candidates, he's the one with the most experience, the one with the best connections, the one who can raise the most money, and the one who probably has the confidence more than any other Republican candidate of the rational people in that party, particularly the business community, which is so important.
And
that's why Jeb Bush. I would be most upset if almost any of the other Republican candidates won the nomination. That would get real trouble.
I think it's. I mean, you know what? As far as winning the nomination, it's interesting. I think in Clinton versus Bush, I think Clinton wins. But again, when I think of the Republican candidate personally, I think their best chance of winning would be Rand Paul. Not because I think he's a good candidate, but because I think he could fool the most people.
He polls very, very well.
Yep.
No question about it, because he has mastered one of the key arts of politics, which is to appeal to completely different, maybe even opposing constituencies at the same time.
Well,
that's one of the arts of successful campaigns at the highest level.
Well, I would
the
say
ability
to
make people who oppose one another believe that you're on their side.
Yeah, it's called double speak and verbal diarrhea. That's what I hear when I hear Rand Paul speaking. That's what I hear when I hear most.
It's called mastery of presidential politics, and he is quite good at it.
All right,
good at it.
But now, okay. Now the other thing about Jeb Bush, though, and I think too much is made of the name. Sometimes people say, "Oh, Bush and Clinton, can't we have somebody else?" We have somebody else. His name's Obama. I mean, I don't get hung up on the name. Although he is already on the campaign trail, he has already said that his number one advisor for foreign policy would be his brother, arguably the architect of some of the worst foreign policy in U.S. history, going back to friggin' Madison. Okay, and I'm sorry, but when you come out and you're gonna remind people whose brother you are and that you're gonna listen to him, I'm sorry. I think that the more he says stuff like that, I'm just thinking he's shooting himself in the foot. I don't know. And
we'll see where things end up in a few months.
No, of course. So now, getting back to it, who would you support personally for the nomination on either side, and who do you actually want to see going forward? Or is that too?
I would be most upset to see anybody other than Bush win the Republican nomination so far of the people who are likely to win it.
Right.
I kind of like Lindsey Graham, but he's not going to be the nominee.
I agree. The thing about Lindsey Graham, I got to say something about Lindsey Graham, because I am very much an anti-Republican. So I think I'm coming at this and I think based on our discussions just now, we can see we're coming at it from slightly different, slightly opposing ideologies. But I will say that among the Republicans, Lindsey Graham has always been a frustrating one for me, because I swear to God, about half of the time, the man makes the most sense in the world and he says intelligent things. And then 5 seconds later, it's like, God, I can't believe I fell for that again. He ends up going right off the rails. But I so far, I haven't heard anything yet. He's basically come out and saying, if you want to go to war, vote for me. It's like, what? Do you not know what?
He is very hawkish, But he comes from the most military state in the country.
Yeah, but he's not
There's
running
more
for. He's not
military
running.
retirees in South Carolina per capita than any other state.
Yeah, I understand,
There's
but he's not running for
a large
president of North
number of
Carolina.
military colleges, including the Citadel. It is a very military state.
Yeah,
so
but
him.
You know what? He's not running for senator of the state anymore. He's running for president of the United States, and he does not have his finger on the pulse of anybody if he's going to run on a I will go to war with Iran platform.
As a matter of fact, he managed to say just about that in a different context. He said, quote, "I'm a traditional marriage kind of guy, but I'm running for president of the United States." So he is going to be quite inclusive of those issues. It makes a lot of sense. But he isn't going to be the nominee. So, we don't need to spend much time discussing it.
No,
the nominee is either going to be Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio,
gotcha.
or Rand Paul or Scott Walker. It's going to be one of those
Walker,
four.
come on, Walker. God, this is the most despicable cretin on the entire ticket, next to Ted Cruz. Blah, Walker.
Ted Cruz is not going to be the nominee.
Well, no, Ted Cruz is an idiot, but Walker makes
Scott Walker is somebody whose politics I detest. Yes.
Okay. No.
In every way and for every reason.
All right. Well, hey,
Marco Rubio, I thought had the potential to be a bold leader, but has caved and has retreated into
I think they've all
followership, and you can't be a leader if you're going to be a follower.
I think they all have, though, to some extent. Maybe not Bush, because I really haven't heard him say enough, but Rand Paul, you go back to that. He wants to be a different kind of Republican, but he's no libertarian. He walks back on gay marriage. He walks back on abortion. He's a Republican. He's just like everyone else. He just hides it better or talks differently, and he gets young people who don't really know what they're doing interested in him.
Different. The libertarians are
he's no
different from everybody else, and you can see that in debates on Facebook about politics when there's Paulites involved. Boy, do they speak a different language.
Well,
from the
I
rest.
understand.
Wow.
I understand that. But
they are.
I'm not talking
very
about.
Identifiable.
I'm not talking about the libertarians out there. I'm talking about the fact that this one individual seems to want to have libertarian cred without claiming to be a libertarian, as if he learned that lesson from his father. But then he walks back on everything that differentiates libertarians from Republicans.
What did I just say to you? He has managed earlier. He has managed to do a masterful job of being on the opposite sides of many questions and having the people on those sides feel that he agrees with them.
Which is why I say if they were going to win, they got to have him on the ticket, largely because I would put it less charitably. He talks out of both sides of his face better than anybody else.
No way he will be a vice presidential candidate. He's too controversial.
Oh yeah, I think
we've learned that you want a vice presidential candidate who will do no harm.
Well,
the vice president will be John Kasich, the most popular Republican governor in the country other than mine, and who, by the way, is the only Republican in any state who polls significantly ahead of Clinton, even in their own state. He beats Clinton by 7 points in Ohio. There's no other Republican who beats Clinton by anything more than a couple of points, even in their home state.
If the Republicans are smart, then they'll do as you say, which I'm going to bet against them doing what you say. For that reason. Now, let's talk about the Democrats a second. Let's talk about the Democrats a second. Obviously, we'll see.
By the way, a new poll came out today by Quinnipiac, which is one of the better polling agencies.
Yeah.
It polled the Florida Republican primary, and it has Bush beating Rubio by 20 to 18.
That's
very close.
That's within margin of error, of course. That's No, I think it's way too early to call the Republican convention. Of course, too many candidates, and you never know. I mean, heck, you know what? Donald Trump is not going to poll at all, but Donald Trump is going to cause a lot of problems and get a lot of people to say things they might not otherwise have said and disrupt things to the point where you could end up some guy answering some stupid thing he says and ends up making a gaffe and shit canning his own, pulling a Rick Perry like Rick Perry did a couple of years ago. I thought Rick Perry was going to...
You have to be very careful dealing with a Donald Trump.
Exactly.
Sure.
And honestly, if I can't remember which election it was the one where he forgot what he was going to ban or get rid of, whatever. I think that was 2008. But I honestly thought he was going to get the nomination. I didn't think it was going to be McCain. I thought Perry was the guy, and I was worried about him. I detest his politics as well. And I thought he has the charisma, he has the swagger, but he got up and he forgot his own policies, and that was that. But I could see an effect like that coming from Trump, not to Trump's benefit, but to the detriment of another, of another candidate. Now, what about on the Democratic side? I mean, Clinton obviously had the early lead. Sanders is coming on strong. You think Sanders is serious? You think O'Malley has a chance? Where do you see that playing out?
No, Bernie Sanders has no chance whatsoever. Again, the Quinnipiac poll that came out today in Ohio, Clinton leads 60 to 15 for Biden to 10 for Sanders. In Pennsylvania, it's Clinton 55, Biden 15, Sanders 10. And in Florida, it's Clinton 64, Biden 10, and Sanders 7. He's irrelevant.
All right, so
he might do okay in New Hampshire.
I would hope he does okay in New Hampshire, but aside from Vermont, no, okay, fair enough. No, and
the
honestly,
nominee will be Hillary Clinton.
Honestly,
I think the nominee will be her, and I think Hillary is an excellent candidate. No question about it.
Okay, all right. Well, I have my misgivings about Clinton. I am not opposed to her. I don't think she's above criticism. I am actually more aligned with Sanders politically, but I am a pragmatic person, and my vote for Hillary Clinton, my very easily cast vote for Hillary Clinton in both the primary and the general, is one of pragmatic compromise. It is one that says the only way the Republicans win is if they have, I say, Rand Paul and anybody but Clinton on our ticket. And that's their best chance, the way I see it. And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's how I see it playing out. And that's why I,
right
for me,
now, Rand
that's
Paul
where my support of Clinton comes
very
from.
well, but not everywhere. He polls very well in some states. Rubio polls very well in some states.
Well, you got to poll well in the swing states. I mean, they're going to get the Southeast. They're going to get the mountains. The Democrats are going to get the Pacific Coast and the Northeast.
That's the only place people are polling right now.
Well, the Midwest. It's going to be decided. It's always decided in the Midwest and Florida, and that's where it's going to be, because those are the states that you can, states like Missouri and Ohio and Florida can go both ways. The Democrats
can have all the Northeast. Pennsylvania, Rubio and Paul poll very, very well.
Did they poll over
Bush,
Clinton?
Bush, just announced, he polls pretty well too. And as I said, Kasich absolutely kills everybody in Ohio.
Well, it's not, but
probably doesn't poll anywhere else.
Your support of Kasich, though, is one of polling and popularity, whereas. Honestly, and you know what? VPs have to be pragmatic picks, but I don't see Sarah Palin or Paul Ryan as having been pragmatic picks. If the Republicans learn from their mistakes, I think you're right. I think they will pick somebody like that, or they'll pick another crusty old white guy like Dick Cheney or whoever the modern equivalent of that's going to be. Or
the VP isn't going to be a Dick Cheney, and it's not going to be a Sarah Palin, and it's probably not going to be a Paul Ryan. That was a big mistake because. For many reasons I don't have to go into.
Yeah, no. Of course.
Kasich, by the way, won his re-election by 30 points.
Well, no, it's not. To me, it's not about Kasich's.
Pretty popular guy.
It's not a question of Kasich's popularity or qualifications. It's a question of the collective wisdom of the Republican Party, which I don't have to tell anybody I have absolutely no faith in whatsoever, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, because the worse they do, and I'm good with that. Hey, I appreciate you coming on the program. It was a good talk, and I look forward to talking to you again. I'll definitely be bouncing some stuff off you in the future. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank Deedee for coming on the program. Had a great discussion, great talk. Got to say, she's the consummate professional. I was really trying my best to get a rise out of her. She really put up with a lot of nonsense from me. I appreciate that. Just totally unflappable. And by the way, really made a lot of good points. There were several points in there that I didn't really get a chance to say, yeah, you know what? I agree with that. In particular, a lot of the points she's making about trade and the economy. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the conclusions, but very, very good points. Regarding the TPP, at the bottom line, from my point of view, she's absolutely correct. Neither this treaty nor any other free trade agreement has anything specifically to do with wages, or even for that matter with outsourcing of jobs. She's correct about that. But these are the net results of these things. And I think whether or not it's good to be speeding up a process that she calls inevitable, I just can't agree with that, and I just don't see an economy that is going to be entirely service or technical or whatever. I think you are going to need, I think that America's economy would be better if we did have people putting things together, even as she calls it non-value-added work. I think that I don't know. I mean, there is an inevitability of that, perhaps, but I don't know that I would support anything, that speeds up that process. But you made a lot of good points. There was a lot that I really couldn't necessarily challenge on or even wanted to. I think that was a very just really a couple more brief things on that. The ISDS, which was something that we kicked about, that it's sort of in the fine print of all of these free trade agreements, and not just the one signed by the United States, but other countries as well. I encourage everybody to do their own research for this. From what I've read about it, and obviously I'm reading the critics of it, I find this detestable. I don't think this is a good idea. I oppose it on principle, and I, on principle, will oppose any treaties that include it, which is to say I will probably end up opposing everything because I don't think it's going away, but I do think it needs to. And for those who don't understand it, by all means, do your own research on the ISDS and how it pertains to these trade agreements, because I think the more people understand about that, well, these aren't going to be very popular. One other big point of disagreement, I do think that she vastly overestimates the importance that this will play in the election. I don't know how strongly she came out in the interview and said it, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, which I unfortunately did a few times, and I do apologize for that, by the way, if Deedee, if you're listening. But I don't think that the Democrats opposing the TPP is going to hurt Hillary's campaign or a potential Bernie Sanders campaign, nor do I think that if either of them came out against the TPP, it would hurt them with most Democratic voters. She is correct that this is primarily opposed by the AFL-CIO, but I find a lot of rank and file Democrats that are not in favor of another one of these multi-country free trade agreements. I don't think it's going to hurt the Democrats at all. I don't think, hey, you know what? If after a potential Bush or Paul or anybody else wins, I will eat my hat if a majority of voters said that they voted for the Republicans because of the Democrats' opposition to the TPP or free trade in general. I will eat my hat, and I've got a lot of hats here. She can pick which one she wants me to eat. I don't think that's going to play at all, and I think it will help the Democratic candidate to actually. Hillary Clinton, if she's going to come out against free trade, it's going to be a little bit more of what you described with Rand Paul, trying to talk to both parties and make them both think she's on your side. But I think that the Democratic candidate coming out with tough rhetoric against free trade is it's going to be to their benefit. I still believe that, and that's based on what I've read, the criticisms that I've read from columnists and the comments that I've read from the rank and file. I don't think there's this broad-based support for it. And if the Chamber of Commerce opposes it, fine, let them support the Republican. They always do. Okay. One thing I do want to say that she got absolutely right, because this was recorded a couple of weeks ago, is Jeb Bush absolutely trouncing Republican candidates in one of them, and she mentioned it. She mentioned the smart money, and boy, is he crushing them when it comes to the fundraising. And right now, this early in the process, the polling doesn't matter. But if you can line up those fundraisers and lock out the other candidates, as Jeb Bush is doing, you're going to have the structural advantage going forward. Not to mention, he's polling pretty damn good. So I think she's right about Jeb in terms of the Republican Party. I think it's a surprise, and I think he probably is the sane choice for them. I don't really see anybody else. Like I say, Rand Paul, but to me, Rand Paul's a phony. I know she says he's mastered the art of, and she's right, he has, but I just tend to see right through that. I like somebody who can stand up and isn't afraid to make enemies and isn't afraid to be the president of the people that voted for them rather than the president of everybody. I think it's been to Obama's detriment that for 4, 6, I would say close to maybe 5 years before he realized he's not going to get the Republicans on board. And they were saying that since day one. I think he wasted most of his first term trying to get the Republicans on board to be the president of all people. And he was not going to be. He was not going to earn the respect of the right, and he never has. And that's not his fault. I mean, I think it's to his fault that he kept trying. So, this whole get different opposing parties to agree, yeah, I call that doublespeak, and it always rubs me the wrong way. I think it's one of the reasons I never liked Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton was also a master of that, triangulation and all that. And I mean, that, granted, it makes for effective politics, but it rubs me, as an idealist, it rubs me the wrong way. But I think she's right about Jeb Bush. I think I don't know about Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton because you know what? It's so easy to say that Sanders is not serious. And don't get me wrong, I know what the polls say. I know Hillary's way out in front, and she's going to stay way out in front. And Sanders will continue to creep, and we'll see what happens once the primary season gets underway. But I think every day that passes, it gets harder and harder to write off Sanders. And don't get me wrong, I had a video right before I started on this station. I had a video on my blog in which I was saying that, you know, why is Sanders even bothering? Why are we talking about this? You know what? Nobody likes an anointed candidate, but you know what? Give Hillary the chance to worry about the Republicans, not Bernie Sanders, etc., and who's a nobody at the time. And well, he was a senator, but he was a nobody as a candidate. Now he's becoming a serious force. He's becoming a real threat. Now, whether or not he's a real threat by the polls, I don't know. And the other thing that's going to earn my vote for Sanders ultimately is going to be some polling that shows not that he can beat Hillary Clinton, which that alone does not exist yet. He is still trailing. He's trailing by a lot. As much as he has the momentum or whatever, of course he's got to build momentum. Of course he's got to get out there and hit the trail. He's coming from behind. I think Clinton is smart not to get out there too early and start campaigning. So, you know, I think that all this momentum, we'll see if he's another Obama, or we'll see if he's just another Howard Dean or somebody like that who makes a lot of noise and raises a lot of good points. Ron Paul always started out really strong because he's an interesting guy. You know, he was interesting to listen to, but you know, nobody, you know, once people had to actually start voting, nobody took him seriously. I think Sanders is better than that. Maybe he can beat Hillary Clinton. I don't know. I still say no. I think most people say no. The conventional wisdom says no. But you know what? It's getting harder and harder to write him off. But he will get my vote when I see some polling that says he can beat Jeb Bush, that says he can beat Marco Rubio, that says he can beat Rand Paul. You know, any of the front runners for the Republic, basically says he can beat the Republicans. If you can show me that, he gets my vote. And it's not got nothing to do, you know, again, I'm a pragmatist, folks, and I want to see, I would much rather see Hillary Clinton win than Bernie Sanders lose. Okay. And to me, that's my primary vote still. You show me something that says he can win, man, I'll go for that. And the site that I'm going to be checking, by the way, and I'm going to mention this now because I would love to get the writer behind this brilliant site on the show. There's a website out there called electionprojection.com. The blogging, it's run by the blogging Caesar, and he does a fantastic job of compiling all the different polls together, you know, and going state by state and getting he's got a really good sense of which polls are significant, and he's a formula for, you know, older polls versus newer polls, biased polls versus objective ones. And right now he has got, in a hypothetical race between Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, he has Hillary Clinton winning 347 electoral votes to Jeb Bush's 191. Now, as we said, hey, it's early. It is ridiculously early. It's too early to even be talking about who's going to get the nominations, let alone where they shake out. But that's where the polling is. That Hillary Clinton is an easy win. And you know what? If he puts up something that shows Bernie Sanders as even a close win, I'll support the guy. But until then, I'm going to caution all Democrats from getting too excited about Sanders. And it really does. It burns me to say it because, again, I am far more aligned with Sanders than I am Clinton. I know a lot of Democrats have some very legitimate misgivings about Clinton. I do not hero worship. I don't even necessarily particularly like Hillary Clinton. I just think that she would be a competent president, if not a fantastic one, and she's definitely going to be a win. I have said it many times, but my first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth consideration when choosing a candidate is the Supreme Court nominations. This is why the Republicans will never get my vote. We do not need another Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, or Antonin Scalia on the bench. We need Ruth Bader Ginsburg to be replaced by a liberal, and we need one of the three I just mentioned. Scalia is the next oldest and longest serving on the court. I would love to replace him with a liberal. I truly would. And you know, again, we have an opportunity here that I just don't want to squander by letting the perfect get in the way of the good enough. Anyway, I really do appreciate her coming on the show. We'll see how the predictions shake out. Anyway, she was right about Bush, and he's really coming on strong in the Republican race. But I think ultimately, I think the blogging Caesar over election projection has it right. I think Clinton crushes Bush, honestly, in the National Electoral College. But we'll see how it goes. Like I said, it's a long time. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. As always, if you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard today or suggestions for future shows, guests, or topics, I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email at niceguy9418@usa.com, friend me on Facebook at Eddie Cabot, or leave a comment on my blog at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday here on Rainbow Radio.